Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. Hey, this week I want to talk about detours. Often in life we run into these detours that take us somewhere maybe we don't want to go, but I want to talk to you about the concept of embracing the detour. Now, when my kids were growing up, we had season passes to Silver Dollar City. If you're not familiar with Silver Dollar City, it's an amusement park in Branson, Missouri. Now, growing up, we lived in Russellville, Arkansas, a little small town in northwest Arkansas, and it was about a 3-hour drive up scenic and very curvy Highway 7 north to Harrison, Arkansas, and then we did Highway 65 and drive right on into Branson. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with the little town of Russellville, it is the home of 2 nuclear power plants, the home of Lake Dardanelle, which is on the Bassmasters Tour. But Russellville sat at the foothills of the Boston Mountain, right in the heart of the Ozark National Forest. Now, on the way up to Silver Dollar City, we played the radio, we played games. One of our favorite was the alphabet game, where we would try to see who was the first one that could spell A to Z, pulling letters off of the billboards as we drove and made our way up to Branson. But we always played games and just kind of made it fun for the kids on the way up because, again, it was a 3-hour drive and started with 4, and eventually we ended up with 6 kids that we were taking back and forth to Branson, and we'd go make those trips. But on those days when we would drive up for a fun-filled day at the amusement park, it was an entertaining day. But then on the way home, I would tell the kids a story. It was a story of a young boy named George that I'd created. And we had all these different adventures that I would tell with George. And I would work and think through the stories on the way up. And sometimes the kids would help me with different ideas. And George kind of became a mainstay of making the trip home, is telling George stories. And I would tell those kids stories until we either made it home or they fell asleep. Sometimes I was hoping they'd fall asleep because I was running out of ideas to share, but we always made it home. But several times a year, we repeated that process. It was one of our favorite places to visit, and still is one of my favorite places to visit today. Now, one particular weekend, we spent the night at the hotel because we had made a decision. We wanted to go attend an old-fashioned church service that they held at Silver Dollar City, and there was a music festival going on, and we had some specific groups we wanted to hear that weekend. But about midday on Sunday, a very heavy rainstorm disrupted our plans. So we waited for a break in the weather and finally decided we're just going to pack it up and we're going to drive back to Russellville. Well, as we made our way down that steep, winding road, we were literally in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the Ozark National Forest, when we started to see the sign that nobody wants to see when you got 6 tired children in the van. That sign said, "Detour ahead." Now, what had happened was that rainstorm that we had experienced in Branson was apparently particularly heavy in that particular area of Arkansas, and it had caused a portion of the highway to actually collapse and slide down a steep embankment. So what was left of the road right up against the edge of a mountain didn't look too stable. So the highway department barricaded the highway and put a sign forcing all traffic to detour around this damaged section of the roadway. So all we could do when we got to this barricade was turn left. If you're like me, I am not a fan of detours. Well, at least I wasn't back then. Now, detours do a number of things that we simply don't like. First off, a detour takes us from our intended route that we were planning to travel. Now, if you're like me when you're planning a trip, I like to find the shortest way to get from where I am to where I want to be so I can spend as little time as possible in a vehicle. Detours take us off our intended path and they delay us getting to our destination, and it makes the journey longer than it should be. Now, secondly, a detour will take us to a place that we really don't want to go. Well, for me and my family, that day, that detour took us on a winding road through many obscure communities I'd never heard of. In fact, I wasn't interested in visiting at all. All I wanted to do was get home, and so did the kids. So that detour that day took us on about a 12-mile journey out of the way as we wound around countless back roads trying to get back to the main highway several miles down the road. Now, thirdly, detours often tax our patience and elevate our stress levels. Now, the kids were tired and they were hungry. Now, driving over a series of winding country roads and passing through communities that were nothing more than a handful of farmhouses was a bit taxing. No restaurants, no convenience stores, not even a grocery store or a gas station as far as the eye could see. Everybody in the car just wanted that trip to be over, and everybody wanted to get home. But we kept driving and driving and driving and driving some more. So, as the leader of my home, I had a decision I had to make. I could let something I couldn't control, AKA that washed out section of the highway, I could let that dictate how I was going to respond, or I could choose to be in control and I could dictate my response. Well, what was before me in that moment was a teachable moment for my children. And my response was going to teach my kids a lesson one way or another. So I paused for a minute and thought, how should I respond to this detour? And after a few moments, I said to the kids, hey, gang, I know you're tired and I know you're hungry, but the road was washed out and there's nothing we can do. We couldn't go the way we wanted to go. So today, we're going to go on a journey of discovery. Now, we've never been down this road before. We may never go down this road again, and we don't know what we're going to see that we may never have an opportunity to see again. So let's see what this road has to offer, and let's enjoy exploring a new and different way to go home. Well, to my amazement, the kids sat up in their seats, turned their eyes to the windows, and they started intensely taking in the scenery. As we drove by farmhouses and through the countryside, the kids took turns pointing out things they had never seen, as well as some up close and personal views of some of their favorite animals, like horses and cows and chickens. We saw a huge hawk sitting on a fence post, staring across a field, probably looking for a rabbit or a mouse to eat. We saw a family of deer right next to the road munching at the grass. So we slowed down and drove by slowly so the kids could get a good look at mama deer, daddy deer, and the baby deer. We saw kids on ATVs. We saw kids riding horses. We saw farmers cutting and baling hay. We laughed at some of the makeshift scarecrows in the gardens with the crows literally sitting on their heads and on their arms. We saw some moms drawing water from a well, and we saw dogs playing and splashing around in a creek. What would have been a normal, uneventful ride home through these crazy, twisted turns and nothing but woods as far as you can see had been transformed that moment into a journey of discovery, learning how people in these remote areas of Arkansas live their lives and raise their families. Now, over the years, we've learned as a family to take the road less traveled. Now, my daughter Jessie and I drove to Orlando a few years back to attend a conference. After the conference, we decided rather than go back the interstate highway, we would take a journey of discovery, going miles out of our way simply to explore and go some places we'd never gone before. So what did we do? We drove through the panhandle of Florida. We drove across the Gulf Coast and we visited the ocean. We stopped and toured a battleship that we saw moored on the side of the road. We crawled through a submarine. We drove all the way to New Orleans and drove around and had an opportunity for Jesse to see the Superdome for the very first time. We drove around some scenic places and I pointed out some areas of interest that are known as some of the go-to places in New Orleans. And we ate at, shall we say, some interesting restaurants in Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi as we were slowly making our way back to Arkansas. All I can say is we drove through parts of America we'd never seen before and may never, ever see again. In a time or two, we almost ran out of gas in the middle of nowhere with no gas station in sight. But along the way, we met some interesting people with some interesting stories, and we had the time of our lives. Now, my family has learned over the years that these detours can be life's way of taking you, where you hadn't intended to go, But along the way, they can introduce you to experiences you never would have experienced had you not been sidetracked on your journey. Sometimes we get so busy going from place to place, we never stop to ask, I wonder what's over there. I wonder what's around that corner. Those detours can now expose you if you're willing to take those trips to people, to places, and events that you might otherwise never come into contact with. It gives you a different perspective on how people live life, and it can teach you some very valuable lessons along the way. So here's what I can say. As far as the Terry family, we've learned to embrace the detours, and so should you. Now, why would I say that? Because all through life, you and I are going to experience challenges, obstacles, and roadblocks. Life isn't always easy, and at times, life can be quite difficult. And how you and I respond to the distractions that we see along the way are going to say a lot about us. Those distractions and how we respond are going to define our level of maturity, our ability to manage stress, and our willingness to think outside the box. Now, if you're stubborn, rigid, and opinionated, you're simply going to try to push your way through by the sheer force of your will. But here's what I can tell you. Some obstacles aren't easy to move. Other obstacles are impassable. You can't go over, you can't go around, you can't go through them. You've just got to find another way. Some roadblocks demand that you go another way, whether you want to or not. On Highway 7, coming back from Branson, Missouri, we experienced one of those roadblock moments that you couldn't go the way you had intended to go. Now, that leads me to a teachable moment for you today, because black belt leaders are flexible and adaptable. Black belt leaders understand there's always more than one way to complete a task, to finish a project, or to get to the finish line. Sometimes God, sometimes fate, sometimes life, call it what you want, wants to take you on a twist or turn that in that moment may appear to be a setback. But understand this. Those detours that you and I experience in life may actually be a setup for the next opportunity that's around a corner that you or I hadn't planned on traveling. What appears in the moment to be a setback, in reality, is a setup and an opportunity to discover, to learn, to grow, to expand, to mature, or to experience something new that takes us on an entirely different journey and exposes us to a higher level of success down the road than what we anticipated. Think about it. How many times did Thomas Edison experience detours on his quest to create the incandescent light bulb? How many times did Madame Curie experience detours on her quest to understand radium and how it could be used to treat cancer? Walt Disney was fired from his first job at a newspaper because they, quote, said he lacked imagination and had no good ideas. He went bankrupt trying to start his own cartoon company. His first movie was a total flop. Now, each one of these experiences, a detour, took Walt on a journey of discovery. He chose to embrace the detours, to see what was around those unexpected turns in the road, to become a pioneer in the field of animation, inspiring millions of children and millions of adults. Now, Henry Ford went bankrupt before he started Ford Motor Company. Albert Einstein struggled academically in school before he became one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. J.K. Rowling was rejected 12 times before someone agreed to publish her very first Harry Potter book. Steven Spielberg was rejected over 2,000 times before he finally made it big in the movie industry. Steve Jobs was fired from the company that he started, only to be rehired and revolutionize the industry with the iMac, the iPod, and the iPhone. Now, think about it. These men and women embraced the detours that were disguised as failure, only to discover something about themselves on this unexpected road of discovery. Now, what looked to the world and perhaps to them in the moment like a setback actually turned out to be a setup for a greater level of success in their life. So, what about you? Are you willing to embrace the detour? Yes, a detour takes you off your intended path, but it may take you on a different path, setting you up to learn the lesson that's been holding you back for years from achieving a greater level of success in your life. But for that to happen, it requires that you embrace the journey, that you be open to the lessons the detour wants to teach you, and be willing to learn or experience something new or different in the process. Yes, a detour is going to take you places that you may not want to go, but if you do the same thing the same way you've always done it, nothing changes in your life. If you do things the same way that you've always done them, you're only going to get more of the same. Again, nothing changes. Now, the detours that you experience in life may take you to where you really need to be to find out what's missing or what's holding you back. That detour may also reveal a new and better way to accomplish a goal, to complete a task, or to expose you to an innovative idea that you hadn't yet considered. And yes, a detour is going to tax your patience, but there's a lesson there in that as well. Sometimes in life you're in such a hurry to get something done so you can move on to what's next, you rush right past what could be the next great opportunity because you're too busy to see it and seize it. And sometimes a detour is God's way, fate's way, or life's way of getting you to pause, take a break, and take some time for yourself. So the next time you see a sign warning you there's a detour up ahead, embrace it, get excited about it, and get ready to go on a journey of discovery. Don't see that detour as a setback, see it as a setup. It is a journey of discovery. It's going to take you somewhere you've never been to experience something you've never experienced. And in the process, you're going to learn something new about yourself along the way. And guess what? That's part of the leadership journey. Learning, growing, expanding, maturing, and becoming a better version of who you are and what you do. And don't forget, that detour sign is often there to protect you from something ahead you need to avoid that you simply can't see yet. Now, you can ignore the detour sign, but you do it at your own risk and at your own peril. And you also risk the lives of those you're leading along the way. So embrace the detour. Get excited about it and lift your expectations so that you have an opportunity to enjoy it for what it is, a journey of discovery. And don't forget, that detour will ultimately get you to where you want or need to go, but in a new or different way. Hey, I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me, and have a great day.